Ada Parker clocked in at Westfield Shopping Center every morning at 8 a.m., her petite frame barely filling out the oversized security uniform that hung loose on her shoulders. At 23, the soft-spoken Romanian immigrant was invisible to shoppers, dismissed by colleagues, and relegated to the most mundane tasks, monitoring fitting rooms, checking receipts, and walking endless circuits around the food court. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. What nobody knew was that Ada had spent 3 years training in Krav Maga and tactical combat, skills honed in secret after witnessing a brutal attack in her homeland that left her younger brother permanently disabled. On this sunny Tuesday morning in suburban Chicago, her hidden expertise would transform from a personal obsession into the only thing standing between hundreds of innocent shoppers and a coordinated attack that would leave the entire community forever changed. Westfield Shopping Center buzzed with its typical Tuesday morning energy as Ada Parker adjusted her radio headset and began her rounds. The massive 3-story complex housed over 200 stores, from anchor department stores like Macy's and JCPenney to specialty boutiques and a sprawling food court that served as the social hub for teenagers and young families. Natural light streamed through the skylights, casting geometric patterns across the polished marble floors where early morning joggers completed their mall walking circuits alongside opening shift employees hurrying to unlock their storefronts. The security office, tucked away behind the customer service desk, operated as the nerve center for the complex. Banks of monitors displayed feeds from over 300 cameras positioned throughout the mall, capturing every angle from the main concourses to the employee break rooms. The morning briefing had been routine. Overnight maintenance had reported no issues, the cleaning crew had finished their work without incident, and store managers were arriving to normal schedules. Detective Mike Rodriguez from the local police department had even stopped by during his routine patrol, sharing coffee and discussing the upcoming holiday shopping season preparations. Ada's supervisor, Chief of Security Thomas Mitchell, ran the operation with military precision developed during his 20-year career with the Chicago Police Department before retirement. He'd transformed the security team from a reactive force that mainly dealt with shoplifters and lost children to a proactive unit that coordinated with local law enforcement, maintained detailed incident reports, and implemented sophisticated surveillance protocols. The team consisted of 12 officers working rotating shifts, with specialized roles ranging from plainclothes loss prevention specialists to uniformed patrol officers who maintained visible presence throughout the complex. The mall's demographic drew families from surrounding suburban communities, creating a steady flow of traffic that peaked during lunch hours and weekend shopping periods. Store managers had developed relationships with the security team, relying on them for everything from medical emergencies to dispute resolution. The complex also served as an informal community center, hosting charity events, blood drives, and seasonal celebrations that brought together diverse groups from the increasingly multicultural neighborhood. What made Westfield particularly challenging from a security perspective was its layout. Multiple entrances, a parking garage with blind spots, and numerous service corridors that employees used but remained largely hidden from public view. The combination of high foot traffic, valuable merchandise, and complex architecture required constant vigilance. Recent months had seen an uptick in organized retail theft, with groups targeting electronic stores and jewelry vendors using sophisticated distraction techniques that required coordinated response from multiple security officers. Ada understood these dynamics better than most of her colleagues realized. During her 3 years at the mall, she'd quietly studied every security protocol, memorized camera positions, and analyzed incident reports with the intensity of someone preparing for something far more serious than shoplifting interventions. Her colleagues attributed her attention to detail to immigrant work ethic, not recognizing the tactical mindset that drove her to understand every potential vulnerability, every escape route, and every position that might provide strategic advantage in a crisis situation. The morning foot traffic was building toward its mid-morning peak when Ada received her assignment from the dispatch desk. Store managers were reporting minor issues, a maintenance request at the electronics store, a customer complaint at the jewelry counter, and the routine task of checking identification for teenagers attempting to purchase age-restricted items at the gaming store. Standard Tuesday morning responsibilities that would keep her occupied with mundane tasks while senior officers handled any situations requiring real decision-making authority. Ada Parker moved through the mall corridors with the quiet efficiency that had characterized her entire 3-year tenure at Westfield Shopping Center. Her colleagues knew her as the dependable immigrant who never complained, never caused drama, and never sought attention. At barely 5 feet 3 inches and weighing perhaps 115 pounds, she appeared almost childlike in the standard-issue security uniform that had been ordered in the smallest available size, but still hung loose on her slight frame. Her accent, though significantly improved since arriving from Romania, still marked her as an outsider in conversations with both colleagues and shoppers. The other security officers had categorized Ada early in her employment. She was detail-oriented, reliable for routine tasks, and sufficiently pleasant to handle customer service situations that required patience rather than authority. Supervisor Mitchell appreciated her punctuality and thorough incident reports, but he never considered her for advanced training or specialized assignments. When complex situations arose, he instinctively called upon officers like Jake Morrison, a former college football player whose imposing physical presence commanded immediate respect, or Sarah Chen, whose assertive communication style effectively de-escalated confrontations. Ada's daily responsibilities reflected this positioning within the security hierarchy. She monitored the family restrooms, assisted elderly shoppers with directions, and conducted routine patrols of the quieter sections during peak hours when more experienced officers covered high-traffic areas. Her radio remained tuned to routine communications, requests for a cleanup in the food court, notifications about suspicious individuals who turned out to be confused tourists, and coordination for mundane maintenance issues that required security presence. What her colleagues didn't know was that Ada processed every interaction, every layout detail, and every procedural element through an analytical framework developed during her intensive combat training. 3 evenings per week, she drove 30 minutes to a specialized training facility in downtown Chicago, where she studied Krav Maga under instructors who'd served with Israeli special forces. The training had begun as therapy, a way to process the trauma of witnessing her younger brother's assault by a group of attackers who targeted him for being different, leaving him with permanent injuries that ended his dreams of becoming a teacher. The combat training had evolved from emotional healing into something approaching obsession. Ada studied not just physical techniques, but tactical psychology, threat assessment, and crisis management. She'd earned certifications in emergency medical response, learned to operate under extreme stress, and developed the kind of situational awareness that made her constantly catalog potential weapons, escape routes, and defensive positions, even during routine mall patrols. Her instructors recognized exceptional natural ability combined with the rare psychological makeup that remained calm under pressure while others panicked. Ada's financial situation reflected her dedication to this hidden training. She lived in a modest studio apartment, drove a decade-old Honda Civic, and maintained a minimalist lifestyle that allowed her to invest every spare dollar in combat training, tactical equipment, and specialized courses that most security guards would never consider necessary. Her apartment contained practice mats, training weapons, and technical manuals that would have surprised anyone who assumed she spent her off hours watching television and video chatting with family back in Romania. The irony wasn't lost on Ada that her colleagues viewed her as unsuitable for challenging assignments precisely because they couldn't see past her quiet demeanor and slight physical build. She'd learned to navigate workplace dynamics by accepting routine assignments without complaint, understanding that demonstrating competence in small tasks was her only path toward eventual recognition. But the recognition never came. Instead, she found herself increasingly invisible, relegated to duties that required diligence but offered no opportunities to demonstrate her true capabilities. Her English had improved dramatically since arriving in the United States, but she'd learned to speak softly and choose words carefully, habits developed from understanding that her accent and immigrant status already created barriers to acceptance. Colleagues meant well when they explained procedures slowly or assigned her to tasks they assumed matched her comfort level. But their assumptions created a professional ceiling that seemed impossible to break through conventional channels. The morning of the attack, Ada completed her routine equipment check with the same methodical precision that characterized all her work. Radio functioning properly, first aid kit fully stocked, incident report forms organized chronologically, and her personal gear, items that weren't standard issue but that she'd begun carrying after months of tactical training, secured in positions where they could be accessed quickly if circumstances demanded their use. The monthly security meeting took place in the small conference room adjacent to Mitchell's office, where fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the smell of stale coffee permeated the air. Ada sat in her usual position near the back, notepad ready, though she already anticipated her role in the discussion. For the past 18 months, these meetings had followed an identical pattern. Mitchell would announce new protocols, discuss incident statistics, and assign specialized training opportunities to officers he deemed ready for additional responsibilities. Advanced de-escalation training starts next month, Mitchell announced, consulting his clipboard. Morrison, Chen, and Rodriguez will represent our department. The course covers crisis negotiation and high-stress communication techniques. Ada's pen hovered over her notepad as she processed the familiar disappointment. She'd submitted a formal request for advanced training 6 months ago, along with documentation of her perfect attendance record and exemplary performance evaluations. But the request had been politely declined, with suggestions that she focus on mastering her current responsibilities. The pattern extended beyond training opportunities. When VIP security details were needed for special events, Morrison's imposing presence was always selected. When complex theft investigations required coordination with law enforcement, Chen's communication skills earned her the assignments. When situations demanded physical intervention, Rodriguez's background as a former bouncer made him the obvious choice. Ada remained assigned to routine patrols, customer assistance, and administrative duties that, while important, offered no path toward career advancement. The district manager wants to implement new emergency response protocols, Mitchell continued, following recent incidents at other shopping centers. We'll need officers trained in tactical assessment and crowd control. Ada straightened slightly, hoping this might represent an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities. Morrison, you'll lead the tactical training. Chen, you'll handle crowd psychology. Rodriguez, you're on emergency medical coordination. The assignments continued without acknowledgement that Ada might possess relevant expertise. Her certifications in emergency medical response, completed at her own expense during weekend courses, remained unknown to her colleagues because they'd never asked about her qualifications beyond the minimum requirements for her position. Her tactical training, which far exceeded anything required for mall security, was invisible to supervisors who saw only her quiet demeanor and slight physical build. After the meeting, Ada approached Mitchell's desk, gathering courage to address the disparity in opportunities. Sir, I wanted to discuss the possibility of additional training responsibilities. I have certifications in emergency medical response, and I've completed advanced courses in crisis management. Mitchell looked up from his paperwork with the patient expression he reserved for subordinates who didn't fully understand their limitations. Ada, you do excellent work in your current role, he replied, his tone carrying the subtle condescension that had become familiar. But these specialized assignments require experience with high-pressure situations and physical demands that might be challenging for someone with your background. We need officers who can command immediate respect and handle confrontational situations. The conversation continued, with Mitchell explaining that her accent might create communication barriers in crisis situations, that her size could be a liability when dealing with aggressive individuals, and that her quiet personality, while suitable for customer service, wasn't ideal for leadership roles during emergencies. Each explanation was delivered with apparent kindness, making it impossible to argue without appearing ungrateful or confrontational. Ada's colleagues weren't intentionally cruel, but their assumptions created an invisible ceiling that seemed impossible to breach through conventional channels. During shift changes, she overheard conversations that revealed their perspective on her capabilities. Ada's sweet, but can you imagine her trying to break up a fight? She'd probably get hurt trying to help. Chen had agreed, adding, "She's perfect for the customer service stuff, though. Shoppers love her." The most frustrating aspect was watching less qualified officers receive opportunities she'd earned through superior performance. When the mall's jewelry store reported organized theft attempts requiring sophisticated surveillance techniques, Ada's detailed knowledge of camera positions and behavioral analysis was overlooked in favor of assigning Morrison, whose approach involved conspicuous presence rather than strategic observation. When medical emergencies occurred, her certified first aid training was ignored while supervisors called for paramedics and waited for professional assistance. Ada had begun documenting these patterns in a personal journal, not from resentment but from analytical necessity. She recognized that her advancement within the conventional security hierarchy was unlikely regardless of her qualifications or performance. The system rewarded certain characteristics: physical presence, assertive communication, and cultural familiarity that she couldn't change. But she also understood that exceptional circumstances might create opportunities that normal protocols wouldn't provide. Her tactical training had taught her that preparation without opportunity was incomplete, but that opportunity without preparation was worthless. While her colleagues focused on immediate responsibilities, Ada continued her comprehensive study of the mall's vulnerabilities, emergency procedures, and potential crisis scenarios. She might never receive official recognition for this knowledge, but she would be ready if circumstances ever demanded her expertise. Ada's evening routine began each Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday when she drove through Chicago's evening traffic to reach the Tactical Defense Institute, a nondescript building in an industrial district where former military and law enforcement personnel taught advanced combat techniques. The facility's parking lot was filled with vehicles belonging to off-duty police officers, private security contractors, and civilians who understood that personal protection required more than hoping violence would never find them. Inside the converted warehouse, fluorescent lights illuminated training mats where students practiced scenarios that most people hoped they'd never encounter. Ada's instructor, David Kozlov, was a former Israeli Defense Force soldier who'd immigrated to Chicago and established the training center after recognizing the gap between basic self-defense classes and the tactical skills necessary for surviving serious threats. The facility's parking lot was filled with vehicles belonging to off-duty police officers, private security contractors, and civilians who understood that personal protection required more than hoping violence would never find them. Inside the converted warehouse, fluorescent lights illuminated training mats where students practiced scenarios that most people hoped they'd never encounter. Ada's instructor, David Kozlov, was a former Israeli Defense Force soldier who'd immigrated to Chicago and established the training center after recognizing the gap between basic self-defense classes and the tactical skills necessary for surviving serious threats. His students included federal agents, bodyguards, and civilians who'd experienced violence and refused to remain vulnerable. Situational awareness isn't just watching for threats, Kozlov explained during a recent lesson. It's understanding how environments can be used tactically. Every location has weapons, barriers, and escape routes that most people never notice. Ada absorbed these concepts with an intensity that impressed even experienced instructors. While other students learned techniques to survive individual attacks, Ada studied principles that applied to protecting multiple people in complex environments. Her apartment reflected this dedication. The small studio contained minimal furniture, but every available space was utilized for training equipment. Resistance bands hung from door frames, practice mats covered most of the floor space, and shelves held technical manuals on topics ranging from tactical medicine to crisis psychology. Her bedroom closet contained gear that would have puzzled anyone expecting typical mall security equipment. Trauma kits with advanced medical supplies, tactical flashlights with disorienting strobe functions, and defensive tools disguised as everyday items. Ada's preparation extended beyond physical training into comprehensive study of her work environment. She'd created detailed maps of Westfield Shopping Center that included information unavailable to most security personnel: structural load-bearing points, electrical system locations, water main shutoffs, and ventilation routing. Her knowledge of the mall's architecture exceeded that of most maintenance staff because she understood that tactical advantage required understanding every aspect of the battleground. During routine patrols, Ada practiced skills that remained invisible to casual observation. She timed response routes between different sections, identified positions that provided both cover and strategic visibility, and mentally rehearsed movement patterns that would be necessary during emergency evacuations. Her colleagues saw routine walking patterns. She was conducting tactical reconnaissance that prepared her for scenarios that emergency protocols didn't address. Her financial sacrifices for this training were significant. While colleagues spent discretionary income on entertainment and consumer goods, Ada invested every spare dollar in courses that enhanced her capabilities. Advanced tactical medicine cost $800. Specialized combat training required monthly fees that consumed nearly 20% of her modest salary. Equipment purchases, from tactical boots designed for rapid movement to concealed defensive tools, represented months of careful budgeting. The language barrier that limited her workplace opportunities became an advantage in training environments where physical capability mattered more than verbal communication. Kozlov and other instructors evaluated students based on their ability to execute techniques under stress, maintain situational awareness during chaos, and make rapid tactical decisions when conventional thinking failed. Ada excelled in these areas, earning respect from training partners who included decorated veterans and experienced law enforcement officers. Her study materials revealed the depth of her commitment. Technical manuals on counterterrorism, crisis leadership, and tactical medicine filled the bookshelf next to language learning resources and community college textbooks. She'd completed online courses in emergency psychology, learning how people behaved during mass casualty events and how effective leadership could prevent panic from escalating dangerous situations into catastrophic ones. Ada's physical conditioning program was designed specifically for the demands of protecting others rather than personal fitness. Her cardiovascular training emphasized sustained performance under stress rather than impressive statistics. Her strength training focused on functional movements, carrying unconscious individuals, moving through obstacles while maintaining weapon control, and maintaining fine motor skills during adrenaline surges that most people lost coordination. The irony wasn't lost on Ada that her intensive preparation had no outlet within her professional responsibilities. She was arguably the most comprehensively trained security professional at Westfield Shopping Center, but her training remained invisible to supervisors who assigned duties based on assumptions about her limitations. Her expertise in countering terrorism exceeded that of licensed paramedics, but she wasn't authorized to provide medical assistance beyond basic first aid. Yet Ada continued her preparation with religious dedication, understanding that readiness wasn't something that could be developed after a crisis began. Every evening training session, every weekend course, and every dollar invested in equipment represented insurance against circumstances that might never occur. But if those circumstances did arise, she would be ready in ways that her colleagues couldn't imagine and wouldn't recognize until it was too late for anyone else to prepare. The first indication that Tuesday would be different from every other routine day came at 11:47 a.m., when Ada noticed unusual activity near the north entrance during her scheduled patrol of the electronics corridor. 3 men in dark clothing had entered separately, but were maintaining visual contact with each other while moving through different sections of the mall. Their behavior triggered alerts that Ada had been trained to recognize: coordinated movement, consistent communication through subtle gestures, and the kind of situational scanning that indicated tactical awareness rather than casual shopping interest. Ada keyed her radio to report the observation, but the communication was interrupted by a sudden spike in emergency calls from other areas of the mall. A medical emergency near the food court had drawn 2 officers, a suspicious package report required bomb squad consultation, and a domestic dispute in the parking garage demanded immediate attention from supervisors. The coincidence of multiple simultaneous incidents struck Ada as potentially significant, but with her radio traffic focused on active situations, her concerns about coordinated movement were relegated to lower priority. The men's behavior became increasingly concerning as Ada maintained discreet observation. They were conducting reconnaissance, noting camera positions, identifying security personnel, and mapping crowd flows with a systematic approach that indicated professional planning. Their ages appeared to range from early 20s to mid-30s. Their clothing was specifically chosen to avoid attention, and their movement patterns suggested familiarity with tactical operations that exceeded typical criminal activity. At 12:15 p.m., during the peak lunch hour, when the food court reached maximum capacity and corridors filled with shoppers moving between stores, Ada observed the 3 men converging near the main atrium. The timing was strategic: maximum civilian presence, stretched security resources, and the kind of chaos that would provide cover for coordinated action. She attempted to contact Mitchell directly, but his radio indicated he was occupied with the parking garage situation that had escalated beyond initial reports. The transformation in the men's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable to someone trained in threat assessment. Their casual browsing behavior shifted into purposeful positioning. Their attention moved from merchandise to people, and their body language indicated transition from reconnaissance to operational readiness. Ada recognized these indicators from tactical training scenarios, but she was experiencing them in real time within an environment filled with unsuspecting civilians who had no awareness of developing danger. The first weapon became visible at 12:23 p.m. when the tallest of the 3 men adjusted his jacket and Ada glimpsed the outline of a handgun concealed beneath his clothing. The confirmation that her suspicions were accurate triggered a surge of adrenaline that years of training had taught her to channel into heightened focus rather than panic. These were not shoplifters or disgruntled customers. They were armed individuals conducting coordinated operations within a crowded public space during peak hours. Ada's radio finally connected with dispatch just as she observed the second man producing what appeared to be a tactical knife from his pocket. "Control, this is Parker. I have 3 suspicious individuals near the main atrium who appear to be armed and coordinating activities. Request immediate supervisor response." The dispatcher's reply was frustrating. "Parker, we're handling multiple priority calls. Continue observation and report any overt criminal activity." Overt criminal activity was exactly what Ada feared would occur within minutes. The men were positioning themselves at strategic points that would provide control over major crowd flows while limiting security response options. Their tactical positioning indicated familiarity with the mall's layout that exceeded casual visitor knowledge, suggesting advanced planning that had identified optimal positions for whatever operation they intended to execute. The third man's actions confirmed Ada's worst fears when he produced a device that resembled an improvised explosive while moving toward the center of the food court, where families with children occupied most tables. The device's construction was crude but appeared functional, and his handling suggested familiarity with its operation. Ada realized that she was witnessing the final moments before a coordinated attack that would target the most vulnerable population within the mall's most crowded area. Her radio communications with dispatch had devolved into frustrating bureaucracy while armed attackers prepared to execute an operation that would result in mass casualties. Mitchell remained occupied with the parking garage incident, Morrison was handling the medical emergency, and Chen was coordinating with external agencies about the suspicious package report. Ada was the only security officer in position to observe the developing threat, and her concerns were being treated as routine suspicious activity reports rather than imminent danger. At 12:28 p.m., with approximately 300 shoppers in the immediate vicinity and children's laughter echoing from the nearby play area, Ada made a decision that would transform her from invisible mall security guard into the only barrier standing between organized attackers and mass tragedy. The training she pursued in secret, the skills her colleagues had never recognized, and the tactical knowledge that had been dismissed as irrelevant were about to become the difference between a routine Tuesday and a community catastrophe that would devastate hundreds of families.
Ada's mind processed the tactical situation with crystalline clarity as she observed the three armed individuals finalizing their positions throughout the main atrium. Her training in crisis assessment automatically cataloged available resources, potential civilian evacuation routes, and strategic positions that could provide both cover and tactical advantage. While her radio crackled with routine communications about minor incidents, she was developing a comprehensive response plan that utilized knowledge of the mall's architecture that no other security officer possessed. The men's positioning revealed their operational strategy. The first attacker had moved to control the main corridor leading toward the department stores, effectively blocking primary evacuation routes for shoppers in the central areas. The second had positioned himself near the escalators, providing oversight of the upper level while maintaining ability to prevent vertical movement. The third, carrying what appeared to be an improvised explosive device, was approaching the food court's central seating area where the highest concentration of families had gathered for lunch. Ada keyed her radio for another attempt at emergency communication, but dispatch remained focused on the multiple diversionary incidents that were clearly coordinated to draw security resources away from the main event. Her request for immediate supervisor response was met with instructions to continue observation and avoid confrontation until backup arrived. Backup that was systematically being misdirected to handle situations designed to prevent their availability during the actual attack. Understanding that official protocols would not address the developing crisis in time to prevent casualties, Ada began implementing tactical solutions that her training had prepared her to execute. Her first priority was disrupting the attacker's coordination by creating unexpected complications that would force them to respond to her initiative rather than execute their planned operation. Her knowledge of the mall's infrastructure provided options that conventional security response wouldn't consider. Ada's position near the electronics store provided access to a service corridor that connected to the mall's main electrical panel. Her months of studying building schematics had familiarized her with systems that could be manipulated to create tactical advantages. By selectively interrupting power to specific sections, she could eliminate lighting in areas where attackers expected visibility while maintaining illumination in zones that would facilitate civilian evacuation routes they didn't know existed. Her concealed tactical equipment, dismissed by colleagues as unnecessary paranoia, now represented her primary resource for engaging multiple armed opponents without backup support. The defensive tools she'd selected were specifically designed for situations requiring immediate neutralization of threats while minimizing risk to bystanders in crowded environments. Her training had emphasized techniques for close-quarters combat that utilized an opponent's size and aggression against them. The first tactical decision Ada made was disrupting the electronic device that the third attacker was preparing to activate near the food court. Her knowledge of improvised explosives, gained through advanced tactical courses that most security personnel never encountered, suggested that the device's detonation mechanism could be compromised by electromagnetic interference from the electronics store's display equipment if properly manipulated. Moving through the service corridors that only maintenance staff typically accessed, Ada approached the electrical systems that controlled lighting and power distribution throughout the central areas. Her tactical training had taught her that controlling the battlefield environment was as important as neutralizing individual threats. By plunging specific areas into darkness while maintaining illumination along evacuation routes, she could create confusion among the attackers while providing clear paths for civilian evacuation.
Her second tactical priority was establishing communication with law enforcement that bypassed the compromised security radio system. Ada activated a personal emergency device that would transmit her exact location and a coded distress signal directly to local police dispatch, providing them with intelligence about the number of attackers, their approximate positions, and the nature of weapons observed. This communication would circumvent the deliberate misdirection that was keeping official response focused on diversionary incidents. Ada's positioning throughout the mall had been strategic rather than routine. During months of seemingly casual patrols, she'd identified locations that provided both concealment and tactical advantage for engaging multiple opponents. Her knowledge of camera blind spots, structural features that could provide cover, and movement routes that avoided civilian areas would allow her to engage the attackers sequentially rather than facing them simultaneously. The tactical timeline she developed allowed approximately 4 minutes to neutralize the immediate explosive threat, disrupt the attacker's coordination through environmental manipulation, and begin systematic engagement of individual opponents before they could execute their planned operation. Her training had prepared her for scenarios requiring rapid decision-making under extreme stress, but she had never anticipated implementing those skills to prevent mass casualties in her workplace. As Ada moved toward her first tactical objective, she understood that her actions would irrevocably transform her role from invisible security guard to either the person who prevented a tragedy or another casualty of violence that no one had believed she was qualified to confront. The months of preparation, the financial sacrifices for advanced training, and the tactical knowledge that had been dismissed as inappropriate for her position were about to be tested in circumstances where failure would result in devastating consequences for hundreds of innocent people who had simply come to the mall to shop and enjoy lunch with their families.
Ada's final attempt to secure official authorization came when she managed to reach Mitchell directly through the emergency override channel, her voice urgent but controlled as she transmitted critical intelligence about the coordinated threat developing in the main atrium. "Control, this is Parker with priority traffic. I have visual confirmation of 3 armed individuals positioning for what appears to be a coordinated attack. One subject is carrying an improvised explosive device near the food court. Request immediate tactical response and civilian evacuation protocols." Mitchell's response came through the radio with the exasperated tone of a supervisor dealing with an overzealous subordinate during an already complicated shift. "Parker, I'm currently managing multiple priority incidents. We have a legitimate bomb threat being handled by specialists, a medical emergency requiring paramedic coordination, and a domestic violence situation that's escalated beyond initial reports. I cannot authorize tactical responses based on suspicious behavior observations." "Sir, this is not suspicious behavior," Ada pressed, her voice maintaining professional composure despite the urgency building in her chest. "These individuals are conducting coordinated reconnaissance. They're armed with both conventional weapons and what appears to be an explosive device, and they're positioning themselves to control civilian movement during peak occupancy. This is an imminent threat requiring immediate response." Mitchell's reply revealed the depth of his dismissal of her capabilities. "Ada, taking a few self-defense classes doesn't qualify you to make tactical decisions during potential terrorist attacks. We have protocols that exist for good reasons, and those protocols require trained professionals to make assessment decisions. Your job is to observe and report, not to conduct independent threat analysis or recommend tactical responses." The radio conversation ended with Mitchell directing Ada to maintain her current position, avoid any actions that might escalate the situation, and await instructions from supervisors who would arrive after completing their current priorities. She was explicitly ordered not to approach the individuals she'd identified, not to attempt communication with civilians in the affected areas, and not to implement any emergency procedures without direct authorization. Ada understood that Mitchell's dismissal wasn't motivated by malice, but by a fundamental inability to recognize capabilities that didn't match his preconceptions about her role and qualifications. In his mind, she was a well-meaning immigrant who'd mistaken normal shopping behavior for coordinated threats because she lacked the experience necessary to distinguish between genuine danger and anxiety-driven misperceptions. The tragic irony was that Mitchell's assessment of the situation was partially correct. Ada did lack experience with actual terrorist attacks or coordinated violence, but she possessed theoretical knowledge and tactical training that exceeded that of most law enforcement officers. Combined with intimate knowledge of the specific environment and comprehensive understanding of the developing threat that no other security professional possessed. As Ada acknowledged Mitchell's instructions with a simple copy control, she realized that official authorization would not be forthcoming. The systematic misdirection of security resources, the dismissal of her threat assessment, and the bureaucratic obstacles preventing tactical response were creating conditions where mass casualties would occur while qualified personnel remained focused on diversionary incidents designed to prevent their availability during the actual attack.
The aftermath of Ada's emergency communications created ripple effects throughout the security team that extended far beyond Mitchell's immediate dismissal of her threat assessment. Within 30 minutes of her urgent radio transmissions, conversations began circulating among officers that questioned not just her judgment, but her psychological stability and professional motives for creating what they perceived as false alarm situations during legitimate emergency responses. Officer Morrison, monitoring radio traffic from his position at the medical emergency, shared his concerns with Chen over their private communication channel. "Did you hear Parker's transmission about coordinated attacks? 3 armed terrorists in the main atrium during lunch rush? Improvised explosives near the food court? It sounds like she's been watching too many action movies." His tone carried the mixture of concern and dismissal that would characterize most discussions about Ada's behavior throughout the afternoon. Chen's response reflected the growing consensus among Ada's colleagues that her immigrant background and limited experience with American security protocols might be creating misperceptions about normal civilian behavior. "She's been acting increasingly paranoid lately. Remember last month when she insisted that group of teenagers were conducting surveillance? They were just hanging out near the game store like kids do. Now she's seeing coordinated terrorism during routine shopping hours." The conversations expanded to include speculation about Ada's mental state and whether her intensive focus on security procedures indicated underlying psychological issues that were manifesting as anxiety-driven threat misidentification. Rodriguez suggested that her European background might make her more susceptible to seeing threats in situations that Americans would recognize as normal social interactions. "Different cultural context," he explained to others. "What looks suspicious to her might be completely normal behavior here." Supervisor Williams, monitoring the communications from the central dispatch, began documenting what he characterized as a pattern of escalating paranoid behavior that might require intervention. Ada's months of detailed questions about emergency procedures, her requests for additional training and tactical response, and her comprehensive knowledge of mall architecture were being reinterpreted as concerning obsessions rather than professional dedication. The timing of Ada's alleged false alarm during legitimate emergency situations created additional suspicion about her motives and judgment. Some officers began questioning whether she was creating dramatic scenarios to gain attention or demonstrate importance during situations where more experienced personnel were handling actual crises. Her persistence in requesting tactical responses, despite official dismissal, was characterized as insubordination disguised as overzealousness. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the mall's consulting psychologist, who occasionally assisted with employee wellness issues, received informal inquiries about signs of immigrant adjustment disorders that might manifest as hypervigilance or paranoid threat assessment. While she couldn't provide specific diagnoses without professional consultation, she confirmed that individuals from conflict-affected regions sometimes experience difficulty distinguishing between genuine threats and normal social environments. The growing doubt about Ada's reliability created operational consequences beyond immediate dismissal of her current observations. Mitchell began reviewing her previous incident reports with new skepticism, questioning whether her detailed documentation of suspicious activities represented accurate threat assessment or anxiety-driven overreaction to normal civilian behavior. Her perfect attendance and exemplary performance reviews were being recontextualized as potential indicators of obsessive personality traits. Other officers began sharing previously unreported concerns about Ada's behavior during routine duties. Her habit of studying camera feeds more intensively than required for her assignments was characterized as excessive surveillance focus. Her knowledge of building infrastructure beyond her job requirements was described as inappropriate curiosity about systems that weren't her responsibility. Her physical fitness routine and defensive equipment were cited as evidence of militant thinking, inappropriate for civilian security work. The investigation into Ada's psychological fitness began with subtle inquiries about her family background, her reasons for immigrating to the United States, and her previous exposure to violence or trauma. While these questions were framed as routine employee wellness concerns, they reflected growing suspicion that her threat assessments were being influenced by unprocessed psychological issues rather than legitimate security observations. Human Resources Director Jennifer Walsh received informal reports about Ada's behavior that characterized her as a potentially unstable employee whose immigrant status and possible trauma history were creating workplace disruption during crisis situations. The report suggested that her intensive security training, while admirable from a personal development perspective, might be creating unrealistic expectations about her role and inappropriate desires to engage in tactical situations beyond her qualifications. The most damaging aspect of the growing doubt campaign was how it reframed Ada's months of professional preparation as evidence of concerning psychological patterns. Her dedication to understanding emergency procedures was characterized as obsessive behavior. Her tactical training was described as inappropriate militaristic thinking. Her detailed knowledge of potential security vulnerabilities was cited as paranoid overthinking rather than professional thoroughness. By early afternoon, the informal consensus among security personnel was that Ada Parker represented a well-intentioned but psychologically unstable employee whose immigrant background and possible trauma history were creating dangerous misperceptions about routine civilian activities. Her urgent warnings about coordinated attacks were being dismissed not just as incorrect threat assessments, but as symptoms of underlying mental health issues that required professional intervention rather than tactical response. The tragic irony was that while her colleagues debated her psychological fitness and professional reliability, the three armed individuals she'd identified continued their operational preparations in the main atrium, their coordinated movements and concealed weapons remaining undetected by security personnel who had been convinced that the real threat to mall safety was their own colleagues' deteriorating mental state.
The confrontation that would define Ada's future at Westfield Shopping Center occurred at 1:15 p.m. when Chief Mitchell summoned her to the security office for what he termed an immediate performance discussion regarding professional judgment and workplace behavior. Ada entered the small, windowless room to find not only Mitchell, but also Human Resources Director Jennifer Walsh and Dr. Sarah Martinez, creating a formal tribunal atmosphere that immediately indicated the seriousness of the situation she was facing.
Mitchell began with documentation spread across his desk that included printouts of her radio transmissions, incident reports from previous weeks, and what appeared to be psychological evaluation materials. Parker, your behavior today has raised significant concerns about your judgment, your understanding of appropriate security protocols, and frankly, your mental state. We need to address these issues immediately before they escalate further or create additional workplace disruption. Ada remained standing, her posture respectfully professional despite the growing realization that her career was being systematically dismantled by supervisors who had chosen to interpret her expertise as instability. Sir, I've observed genuine security threats that require immediate tactical response. I understand that my assessment differs from current operational priorities, but I stand by my professional observations and my recommendations for civilian safety. Walsh interrupted with concerns about Ada's psychological fitness for security responsibilities. Ada, we've received reports about increasingly paranoid behavior, obsessive focus on threat identification, and what appears to be difficulty distinguishing between normal civilian activities and genuine security concerns. These patterns suggest underlying issues that might require professional intervention and temporary removal from security duties. The questions that followed revealed the depth of investigation into Ada's personal background and psychological profile. Dr. Martinez inquired about her family's experiences in Romania, whether she'd witnessed violence that might be affecting her current threat assessments, and whether her intensive security training represented healthy professional development or compensation for unresolved trauma. Each question was framed with clinical compassion but carried implications about her mental stability. Mitchell's assessment of her professional limitations was delivered with bureaucratic precision that made disagreement seem unreasonable. Ada, you're an excellent employee within your assigned role, but you've demonstrated concerning tendencies to exceed your authority and make tactical decisions that are beyond your training and experience. Your immigrant status creates communication barriers during crisis situations. Your physical limitations make you unsuitable for confrontational scenarios, and your recent behavior suggests judgment issues that raise questions about your reliability. The conversation continued with specific restrictions being placed on Ada's duties and responsibilities. She was being temporarily reassigned from patrol duties to administrative tasks that would keep her away from public areas where her misperceptions might create additional false alarm situations. Her access to security communications would be limited to prevent future disruptions during legitimate emergency responses. Her requests for additional training were being permanently denied due to her demonstrated inability to properly utilize her current level of authority. Ada, we want to help you, Walsh continued, her tone carrying the patronizing kindness that made resistance seem ungrateful. But that help requires acknowledging that your current approach to security work isn't sustainable. You need to accept that your role is administrative support, not tactical assessment. Your value to this organization is in customer service and routine maintenance, not in emergency response or threat analysis. Dr. Martinez recommended psychological counseling to address what she characterized as adjustment disorders related to immigrant status and possible trauma exposure that were manifesting as hypervigilance and paranoid threat assessment. The counseling would be mandatory for continued employment, and her return to normal security duties would depend on professional evaluation confirming her psychological stability and appropriate understanding of her role limitations. Mitchell's final restrictions were comprehensive and devastating to any hopes Ada had maintained about demonstrating her true capabilities through official channels. She was banned from accessing security cameras beyond her immediate work area, prohibited from studying building schematics or emergency procedures, and explicitly ordered to limit her communications to administrative necessities rather than tactical observations. Any future reports about suspicious activities would require supervisor approval before being transmitted to other personnel. Ada, I need you to understand that this conversation is for your protection as much as ours. You've created a situation where your judgment is being questioned and your reliability is being doubted. The only way to restore confidence in your professionalism is to demonstrate that you can function within appropriate boundaries and accept the limitations that your position requires. Ada's response was brief and controlled, though her colleagues couldn't recognize the tactical calculation behind her apparent acceptance. "I understand your concern, sir. I accept the restrictions you've outlined, and I'll comply with the administrative reassignment." What they didn't understand was that her compliance represented strategic withdrawal rather than surrender, preparation for independent action rather than professional submission. As the meeting concluded with paperwork documenting her official reprimand and duty restrictions, Ada realized that her months of preparation for crisis situations would need to be implemented without institutional support, official authorization, or backup assistance. The system had not only failed to recognize the developing threat, but had systematically eliminated the one person who possessed the knowledge and capability necessary to address it.
At 1:47 p.m., as Ada sat in the break room reviewing the administrative paperwork that had effectively ended her security career, the sound of breaking glass from the main atrium shattered the afternoon quiet and confirmed her worst fears about the coordinated attacks she'd been unable to prevent through official channels. The tactical situation she'd predicted was unfolding exactly as her training had taught her to expect, but with the devastating addition that no qualified personnel were in position to respond because they'd been systematically misdirected by the diversionary incidents. The emergency alarm system activated with the piercing wail that indicated active threat situations, but the response was chaotic and uncoordinated because the security team had been scattered across multiple false emergencies that had consumed their resources and attention. Mitchell's voice crackled through the facility-wide announcement system with panic that revealed his complete lack of preparation for the situation Ada had tried to warn him about. "All personnel and shoppers, we have an active security situation. Please evacuate through nearest exits in an orderly fashion." Ada's radio, despite being officially restricted, still received emergency transmissions that painted a picture of developing catastrophe. Morrison's voice from the north entrance reported armed individuals preventing evacuation through primary routes. Chen transmitted from the upper level about explosive devices that had created structural damage and blocked stairwell access. Rodriguez called for medical assistance as civilians began sustaining injuries during the panicked evacuation attempts that were being systematically frustrated by the attacker's strategic positioning. The realization hit Ada with crystal clarity. She was the only person in the facility who had anticipated this scenario, prepared for tactical engagement with multiple armed opponents, and possessed comprehensive knowledge of alternative evacuation routes that could save civilian lives. Every month of training, every dollar invested in equipment, and every hour spent studying the mall's tactical geography had been preparation for this exact moment when institutional failure would require individual action. Her decision point arrived when she heard children screaming from the food court area, where families had become trapped by the combination of explosive damage and armed intimidation. The sound of genuine terror from innocent victims who had simply come to share lunch together crystallized Ada's understanding that professional consequences were irrelevant compared to human lives that hung in the balance during the next critical minutes. Ada's choice to act independently required acknowledging that she would be violating direct orders, abandoning her assigned administrative duties, and implementing tactical responses without authorization or backup support. But her tactical training had prepared her for scenarios where conventional authority structures would be inadequate for crisis response. She understood that individual initiative was sometimes the only barrier between organized violence and mass casualties. The equipment she'd been carrying, despite official disapproval, suddenly transformed from evidence of inappropriate paranoia into essential tools for civilian protection. Her concealed defensive implements, emergency medical supplies, and tactical communication devices represented the difference between systematic execution of helpless victims and organized resistance that could disrupt the attacker's operational planning. Ada's final radio transmission before switching to independent operations was brief and professionally controlled. "Control, this is Parker. I'm implementing emergency response procedures to assist trapped civilians. Do not send backup to my location." She switched off her official radio and activated her personal emergency beacon that would provide law enforcement with tactical intelligence about attacker positions and civilian evacuation routes.
Her approach to the crisis was methodical and precise, based on tactical principles that emphasized systematic disruption of enemy coordination rather than heroic confrontation. The attackers had planned for conventional security response. They had not anticipated engagement with someone who understood their operational methodology and possessed both the skills and knowledge necessary to implement counter-tactical solutions. Moving through service corridors that provided concealment and tactical advantage, Ada began implementing the response plan she'd developed during months of preparation. Her first objective was securing alternative evacuation routes for trapped civilians, using her comprehensive knowledge of building infrastructure to guide families through passages that the attackers hadn't identified or secured. Her second priority was disrupting the attackers' communication and coordination by implementing environmental changes that would force them to respond reactively rather than execute their planned operation. By manipulating electrical and mechanical systems that most security personnel never studied, she could create tactical advantages that would allow outnumbered defense to succeed against coordinated offense. The point of no return had been crossed not when she made the decision to act, but when she began the years of preparation that had made effective action possible. Ada Parker was no longer a dismissed mall security guard following administrative procedures. She was a tactical operator implementing crisis response solutions that her training had prepared her to execute under exactly these circumstances. As she moved toward her first tactical objective, with the sound of civilian terror echoing through the corridors, Ada understood that the next phase of the crisis would determine whether her months of preparation would prevent a tragedy or become another casualty of violence that everyone had believed she was unqualified to confront. The test of her capabilities was beginning, and failure was not an option that would allow her to live with the consequences.
Ada's transition from dismissed security guard to independent tactical operator began in the utility corridor behind the electronics store, where months of reconnaissance had revealed access to the mall's primary electrical distribution panel. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she manipulated circuit breakers in a sequence that would create strategic lighting patterns throughout the main atrium, darkness in areas where attackers expected visibility, illumination along evacuation routes that civilians could follow to safety. The tactical advantage of environmental control had been emphasized repeatedly during her training at the Tactical Defense Institute. By forcing opponents to operate in conditions they hadn't anticipated, a single defender could disrupt coordinated operations that relied on predetermined positioning and timing. Ada's intimate knowledge of Westfield's infrastructure provided capabilities that the attackers couldn't have planned for, even during their extensive reconnaissance phase. Her personal equipment, concealed despite official disapproval, transformed from evidence of inappropriate paranoia into essential tools for civilian protection. The tactical flashlight with strobe function would disorient opponents who had adapted their vision to normal lighting conditions. The emergency medical kit contained supplies for treating traumatic injuries that conventional first aid equipment couldn't address. The concealed defensive implements were specifically designed for close-quarters engagement in crowded environments where conventional weapons would endanger bystanders. Ada's communication strategy involved bypassing the compromised security radio system that was broadcasting panic and confusion rather than tactical coordination. Her personal emergency beacon transmitted coded signals directly to law enforcement dispatch, providing real-time intelligence about attacker positions, civilian locations, and optimal approach routes for professional tactical teams. The beacon also recorded audio that would document her actions for post-incident analysis, assuming she survived to face accountability for her unauthorized intervention. The psychological preparation that her training had emphasized proved as crucial as physical readiness. Ada's mind processed the developing crisis with analytical clarity rather than emotional panic, categorizing threats by priority, identifying resource limitations, and calculating tactical solutions that maximized civilian safety while minimizing personal exposure. Her immigrant experience of adapting to unfamiliar environments under pressure had developed resilience that proved invaluable during genuine crisis situations. Her approach to the tactical situation emphasized systematic disruption rather than direct confrontation.
The attackers had planned for conventional security response, uniformed officers responding predictably through primary corridors with standard equipment and limited tactical training. They had not anticipated engagement with someone who understood their operational methodology and possessed both specialized skills and comprehensive environmental knowledge necessary for implementing counter-tactical solutions. Ada's intimate knowledge of Westfield's infrastructure provided capabilities that the attackers couldn't have planned for, even during their extensive reconnaissance phase. Her first tactical objective was neutralizing the improvised explosive device that threatened the food court area, where families with children had become trapped by the structural damage and armed intimidation. Her training in explosive ordnance recognition suggested that the device was designed for psychological impact rather than maximum casualties, but its detonation in a crowded area would still result in significant injuries and could trigger panic that would create additional casualties during evacuation attempts. The specialized equipment Ada carried included electromagnetic pulse generators that could disrupt electronic detonation systems without creating the collateral damage that conventional bomb disposal techniques might produce in civilian environments. Her knowledge of improvised explosives, gained through advanced tactical courses that exceeded most law enforcement training, provided options for device neutralization that standard security protocols didn't address. Her secondary objectives involved creating evacuation routes for trapped civilians using passages that the attackers hadn't identified or secured. Ada's comprehensive knowledge of building infrastructure included maintenance tunnels, service elevators, and emergency exits that weren't marked on standard evacuation plans, but provided safe passage for families who couldn't reach primary exits due to attacker positioning. As Ada completed her covert preparation phase and began moving toward active engagement, she understood that her success would depend on maintaining tactical initiative through unpredictable actions that forced opponents to respond reactively rather than execute their planned operation. The next phase would test whether her months of preparation had been adequate for the reality of protecting innocent lives against coordinated violence that her colleagues had dismissed as paranoid imagination. The sound of children crying from the food court area provided emotional motivation that transcended professional considerations or personal safety concerns. Ada Parker was no longer fighting for career recognition or institutional validation. She was implementing tactical solutions to prevent mass casualties among families who had simply wanted to enjoy lunch together on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. Ada emerged from the service corridor into the main electronics store at 2:03 p.m., moving with the controlled urgency that her training had developed for high-stakes operations in civilian environments. The store's emergency lighting cast strange shadows that provided tactical concealment while she assessed the situation in the central atrium through the large display windows. The scene confirmed her worst predictions. The three attackers had established tactical control over key positions while panicked shoppers huddled behind overturned tables and decorative barriers that offered psychological comfort but no real protection. The first attacker, positioned near the main entrance, was using his firearm to prevent civilian evacuation while maintaining communication with his accomplices through hand signals that Ada recognized from her tactical training. His positioning was strategically sound, but relied on predictable sight lines that could be compromised by someone approaching from unexpected angles through routes he hadn't secured. Ada's knowledge of the mall's architecture provided access to positions that weren't visible from his current location. The second attacker had moved to the upper level, where he could provide oversight of the main floor while controlling access to the escalators and emergency stairwells. His elevated position offered tactical advantages, but also created vulnerabilities that someone with climbing capabilities and knowledge of structural access points could exploit. Ada's months of physical conditioning for vertical movement and confined spaces had prepared her for engagement scenarios that required three-dimensional tactical thinking. The most immediate threat remained the third attacker near the food court, who was using the improvised explosive device as psychological leverage to control approximately 50 civilians who had been unable to reach exits before the coordinated attack began.
His positioning suggested military or paramilitary training, but his device handling indicated less expertise with explosives than with conventional weapons. This combination created opportunities for neutralization that required specialized knowledge and precise execution. Ada's first tactical move involved manipulating the mall's public address system from a maintenance panel that most employees didn't know existed. Her voice, transmitted through speakers throughout the complex, provided calm instructions that helped trapped civilians identify safe movement routes while creating confusion among attackers who hadn't anticipated coordinated evacuation guidance. Shoppers in the food court moved slowly toward the service corridor behind the pizza counter. Families with children followed the green emergency lighting toward the north maintenance exit. The instructions were coded to provide tactical intelligence for responding law enforcement while offering practical guidance for civilian evacuation. Ada's use of specific location references and movement patterns would help professional tactical teams understand the layout and civilian positions when they arrived, while her calm delivery helped prevent panic that could have resulted in additional casualties during evacuation attempts. Her approach to the explosive device required movement through ventilation passages that connected the upper-level mechanical rooms to service areas behind the food court. The route involved crawling through confined spaces that her small stature made navigable while larger individuals couldn't have attempted. Her tactical training had emphasized using perceived physical limitations as operational advantages during scenarios that required unconventional approaches. The electromagnetic pulse device that Ada carried was designed specifically for disabling improvised explosives without creating the thermal or kinetic effects that conventional disruption methods might produce in civilian environments. Her training in explosive ordnance disposal had covered theoretical scenarios involving crowded public spaces where standard bomb squad techniques would endanger bystanders, requiring alternative approaches that prioritized civilian safety over procedural orthodoxy. Ada's positioning above the food court provided tactical oversight that revealed the attackers' coordination patterns and communication methods. Their operational planning was sophisticated, but relied on controlling predictable civilian behavior and conventional security response. They had not anticipated engagement with someone who understood their tactical methodology while possessing capabilities and knowledge that exceeded standard security training parameters. Her descent into the food court area utilized rappelling techniques practiced during her climbing training, allowing her to appear behind the attacker's position while remaining concealed from his accomplices, who were maintaining overwatch from other locations. The combination of environmental manipulation, unexpected positioning, and specialized equipment created tactical advantages that transformed her from a single defender into an effective counterforce against coordinated opposition. As Ada prepared to engage the explosive device that threatened dozens of trapped families, she activated her emergency beacon's recording function to document her actions for post-incident analysis. Her voice, barely audible but clearly determined, spoke into the device. "This is Ada Parker, implementing tactical response to neutralize immediate threat to civilian lives. Time is 2:07 p.m." The next phase would require perfect execution of techniques she'd practiced hundreds of times in training scenarios, but never implemented in real crisis situations. The electromagnetic pulse would either disable the detonation system safely or potentially trigger the explosive through unintended electronic feedback. Ada's training had covered theoretical scenarios involving crowded public spaces where standard bomb squad techniques would endanger bystanders, requiring alternative approaches that prioritized civilian safety over procedural orthodoxy.
Ada's hands remained steady as she positioned the electromagnetic pulse device against the improvised explosive, her months of technical training guiding precise placement that would disrupt a detonation circuit without triggering thermal backup systems. The device's crude construction, designed more for psychological impact than sophisticated engineering, responded to the electromagnetic interference exactly as her training had predicted. The blinking activation light went dark, and the improvised explosive became an inert collection of components that no longer threatened the terrified families huddled nearby. Device neutralized, Ada whispered into her emergency beacon, then immediately shifted her attention to the tactical situation that remained unresolved. The explosive threat was eliminated, but two armed attackers maintained positions that prevented civilian evacuation and threatened additional casualties if not addressed systematically. Her training had prepared her for sequential engagement scenarios where neutralizing one threat created opportunities to address remaining challenges. The families in the food court looked up at Ada with expressions that ranged from confusion to desperate hope. Her small stature and mall security uniform didn't match their expectations of rescue, but her calm competence and successful neutralization of the explosive device had established her credibility. "Follow me single file toward the service corridor," she instructed quietly. "Stay low, move quietly, and keep children between adults." Ada's guidance of civilian evacuation through routes that the attackers hadn't secured proved the value of her comprehensive knowledge of the mall's infrastructure. The service corridors and maintenance passages that she'd studied during months of preparation provided safe passage for families who had been trapped by the attackers' control of primary exits. Her tactical training had emphasized that protecting innocent lives was as important as neutralizing threats, and successful operations required both capabilities. The sound of approaching sirens indicated that law enforcement tactical teams were finally responding to the genuine crisis, but Ada understood that their arrival would be complicated by the misinformation and false alarms that had initially misdirected their resources. Her emergency beacon continued transmitting tactical intelligence that would help professional responders understand the actual situation rather than the confused reports that had characterized initial communications. The two remaining attackers began showing signs of operational stress as their coordinated plan unraveled due to factors they hadn't anticipated. The civilian evacuation routes that Ada had opened eliminated their tactical leverage, while the environmental controls she'd implemented created confusion that disrupted their communication and positioning. Their sophisticated operation was being systematically dismantled by a single defender they had never expected to encounter. Ada's final tactical engagement occurred when the lead attacker attempted to regain control by moving toward the service corridors where civilians were evacuating. Her defensive training, months of specialized combat preparation, and tactical understanding of close-quarters engagement in civilian environments combined in a brief but decisive confrontation that demonstrated why her size had never been a limitation to her capabilities. The encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, but confirmed everything Ada had learned during years of preparation that others had dismissed as inappropriate paranoia. Her speed, precision, and tactical awareness overcame physical disadvantage through superior training and better tactical positioning. The attacker's weapon was secured, his mobility was compromised, and his ability to threaten additional civilians was permanently eliminated. As law enforcement tactical teams finally arrived and began securing the scene, they found a situation far different from the coordinated terrorist attack that had been reported. Instead, they discovered two armed attackers in custody, an improvised explosive device safely neutralized, and approximately 80 civilians successfully evacuated through routes that weren't included in standard emergency procedures. The operation had been resolved by someone whose name wasn't included in any tactical response protocols. 6 months later, Ada Parker stood before a congressional subcommittee investigating domestic terrorism preparedness. Her testimony provided insights into security vulnerabilities and tactical response capabilities that had prevented a significant domestic terrorism incident. Her actions at Westfield Shopping Center had not only saved lives, but had revolutionized thinking about civilian security and the importance of comprehensive preparation for unconventional threats. The quiet Romanian immigrant who had once been dismissed as unsuitable for serious security responsibilities was now recognized as an expert in tactical response and civilian protection. Her training institute had become a model for advanced security education, and her techniques were being studied by law enforcement agencies nationwide. Most importantly, the families whose lives she had saved continued to remind her that true strength wasn't measured by physical size, but by the courage to act when action was required. Ada's story became a testament to the power of preparation, the danger of preconceptions, and the difference one person could make when training met opportunity and expertise overcame prejudice. The mall security guard who had hidden deadly secrets had revealed that the most dangerous underestimation is assuming that heroism comes in predictable packages. The afternoon sun streamed through the same skylights where Ada once walked unnoticed patrols, but now those corridors were filled with families who understood that safety sometimes depends on the people others choose to overlook. Her badge still read security, but everyone who encountered her knew they were meeting someone whose dedication to protecting others had transformed her from invisible guardian into an unforgettable hero. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.